Great. As I said, welcome along. Thanks to the last couple that seem to be joining us just as we get started. Without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to our co-presenter today. Tony, if you'd like to launch in, what are we here to hear about?
Thanks very much, Kelly. I'm delighted to have so many people along to hear about the latest NTARC accident investigation report. It's really important to NTI and has been for a long period of time, which I'll talk a little bit about. As I said, my name's Tony Clark. I've been with NTI now for 20 years, CEO for about 14, I think. So very privileged to be part of this organisation for such a long period of time. And it's been an amazing journey over that period of time. As NTI, we really want to come up with a great purpose for the organisation, and ours is we make you safer and more sustainable. Now, we apply that to whether it's an employee, we want them to be safer and have ongoing employment with us as we grow as a business. We want our brokers to, be rewarded for the hard work they do and the great advice they give. We want our customers to be safer and more sustainable, not just by getting them back on the road quicker than any other insurer, which we measure and know we do, but also by working with our customers and how they can be more safer and what value we can add to their business to make them more sustainable in the long term. So sometimes you can have those words as a purpose. They don't mean much, but hopefully we're investing in the right areas to make people understand that we really do value that involvement. You probably know we're a foundation sponsor of the Australian Trucking Association. One of our employees back then, over 30 years ago now, we went to the 30th anniversary, decided to spend about 3 years of our marketing budget to make us one of the foundation sponsors. And it's been a wonderful partnership over a long period of time, as are the partnerships with all the other associations around Australia that we're involved in, who all do great work. You may have seen over the year, we rebuild or we turn a new truck into an old truck for motor neuron disease research. The latest one was Jolene, which raised over $350,000 for motor neuron research, which we're very proud of. We love being involved in the Burrumbuttock Hay Run, which has had its challenges this year. I think Bumper's trying to get it up and running again a bit later in the year to make sure we can try and get some of the hay, because there is plenty around in lots of areas of Australia, to the more needy in the country. It's a really great cause. And of late, the involvement in healthy heads in trucks and sheds. And I'm learning about that as I go along that journey, being on the board, of really how our industry has a long way to go and has some serious issues as far as mental health go, as a community of transport and logistics, and considering how big a part of the economy it is. Anything we can do to raise awareness, but also create solutions as we get more involved with healthy heads, and make it easier for transport operators of all sizes and logistics operators of all sizes to bring solutions to their people. So that's another really important part of what we do. Back to NTARC. It actually came from a fairly dark period in NTI's history, a little over 20 years ago. I'll say it was before I started. But a decision was being made as to whether to shut the doors at NTI at one stage. It was losing about $1 million a month. There weren't many trucks on the road that hadn't had an accident at that stage, we believed. And unfortunately, back in those days, you only had a sledgehammer approach where you went to brokers and said, well, we're not insuring that operator anymore. And that was the level of maturity back then a long time ago. So we had the sledgehammer approach. You would have, of Owen Driscoll. Owen's idea was how we can provide data to the industry to help them improve the industry. And what we've seen the industry do over that period of time is nothing short of extraordinary. They were pretty agricultural numbers, I'd say, back in the early days, and the interpretations were as good as we could do at the time. And what I know is that since Adam's taken over custodian of that data from Owen, it's always improving and always going to a new level of information. So it is about us working with the industry to make sure not only that people are insurable, but we want people to be safer and more sustainable in our industry, and anything we can do to contribute to that, we're happy to be involved with. And I suppose using our data since 2001 on claims, it's arbitrarily over $50,000. That's fine, because that normally indicates a claim of some significance. And it's brought up some really interesting findings over that time. And the great thing is that the industry has acted on it, and you've seen improvements in a lot of those areas over time and continued to see improvements. Whenever you get a call from a lot of media organisations, it's always wanting to find about the bad story about transport. Really, the great stories that are out there of what you and your people do, they're the ones we should be promoting, and they're the ones that we want us to promote. And I know we have a review of all of the reports over the last, since 2001, to show that improvement over that time, which we'll be working on later in the year. This is the 10th report. They used to be biennial, and now they're annual, which is a big piece of work for us. But we really believe that it's important that we stay involved in this and keep that information coming to the industry. And also it's led us down the path of things like our Better Business Hub, to give people tools for the way they run the business and the ability to improve your businesses in every aspect of your business. And particularly with people like Kelly and her involvement in the people side, of which is so important to all of us. We measure ourselves closely on the engagement of our people, and have done for many years now. And have been fortunate to win a Best of the Best Employer Australia and New Zealand a few years ago, and in general in the top employers. So we don't say you should be doing this. Hopefully we're putting pressure on ourselves to say, what do we want to do to improve as a business and how we engage with our people? And you'll find some of those tools and things that we've learned, or experts that we're bringing to the table, which is the exciting thing. It isn't just NTI saying this. There's a whole range of experts that we want to bring to the table and get their messages out that allow your businesses to run better. So that's a very brief history of our involvement in the NTARC report. It's an exciting report again this year, and I'd like to introduce Adam Gibson, which I'm sure you all know. And as Kelly said, please make sure you send him plenty of questions, and please interrupt him, because he can talk a bit. So we're more than happy to get those questions through and make sure we keep Adam on his toes. And also, when you go away and think about the report, if there are things that you think we should analyse differently or bring to the table, please let us know, because this just needs to be improved all the time. It's not all about us, it's about the industry. So over to you, Adam.
Thank you very much for that really fantastic introduction, Tony. Before I jump into the slide deck, I just wanted to talk and sort of reinforce what Tony had to say. NTI is just privileged to have this relationship with our industry, that we're neither regulator nor competitor, but instead we're on this journey together. And it's so wonderful to have a business that commits itself in real tangible ways to working so positively with its customers. I will make one little observation around the culture inside of NTI. I started with NTI a bit over 3 years, nearly 3.25 years ago. And someone said, I was having a conversation I couldn't remember with, I didn't know the name of the person I've been chatting with. And I described them as, the really nice guy who sits in the corner with the silver hair. And they said, Tony. I'm like, I guess. Yeah, it turned out that was the CEO, that the relationship inside of the business is so flat and so positive that I was having friendly chats with the CEO without even realizing it within about 10 minutes of stepping inside of the door. And it's a real credit both to Tony and the organization. All right, let me throw up the slide deck for today. So we've said who NTI is. We are Australia's specialist insurer. We cover a really narrow range of markets, and we cover them really well. This is as we said, the 10th edition of our NTARC Major Accident Investigation Report, and it's become a really important piece of information, both for the transport industry and also in the road safety space. We haven't had any significant piece of heavy vehicle road safety reform in the last decade that hasn't extensively referenced this work. And I've got to give credit to my predecessor, Owen Driscoll, for having the vision to say, yeah, people will read a 35-page report on truck insurance claims because the value of it with hindsight is incredible, but you've got to credit his vision for seeing that and believing in it. There is a bit of a change I want to talk about before I dive into the numbers this year, and both Kelly and Tony have already sort of foreshadowed this, is we'll continue to do the report, and it's important, so we have that time series to compare how we're doing today with how we were doing 5, 10, and 15 years ago. But for the most part over that history, we were about putting the numbers up there to put some shape around the problem and largely leaving it to the industry to work out how best to respond. And we're pivoting that. How do we get more involved in driving those numbers in the right direction? How can we be the conduit that connects someone who's doing some really great work? And I'll call out names here. I see Alan Pincott in the attendees list. He's one of my favorite people, has done fantastic work around reducing serious rollover crashes, particularly in the forestry industry. How do I connect someone with that experience with another occupation or another industry that's got that problem? And yeah, we're in this really wonderful place, and you'll see a lot from us around that, particularly via our Better Business Hub and via our social media accounts. So looking into the report findings in general. Now, as Tony mentioned, this is our heavy motor claim, so truck involved crashes over $50,000 total incident value that took place in calendar year 2020. There was 852 large losses in 2020, which is only an increase of 4 on the prior calendar year, despite the fact that we had both significant growth in NTI's insured portfolio and that inflation inevitably means that there's more crashes over that threshold every year. In fact, if we dig deeper on it, our large loss frequency per powered unit dropped by 20% in 2020. Now, that doesn't come as a surprise to most people because obviously 2020 was not a normal year. In fact, digging deeper into those numbers, our large loss frequency for multi-vehicle, particularly truck and car crashes, dropped by 16%. And that's where most of that reduction came from. So with that reduced rate, the numbers still add up to 100% in this because of how we structure the findings. What do we see? Firstly, driver error. This is still, for all practical purposes, 2/3 of our large losses each year. And into that space, we're bundling some sub-causes inside of driver error and also inappropriate speed crashes. So that's continuing to grow and is still a great concern. Balancing that, I've got a really positive story to tell about fatigue, that it dropped to the lowest level in the history of the NTARC data series, which is a really positive thing. What's been our headline figure realistically for the last 5 reports? Probably decade now, actually, probably 7 reports, has been our truck and car fatal crashes. That number remained consistent, sitting around 80%. It was actually just under at 78%, but that is essentially within a rounding error of that same number. And it remains the case that if you hear on the news of a fatal crash involving a truck and a car, that 4 out of every 5 times, the truck driver will be the not at fault party. And that speaks a lot around what one might do to try to push that number downwards. And the final thing, I'll touch on all of these later on in the presentation, is last year I had the absolute displeasure, if I'm honest, of reporting that in 2019 we'd had a dramatic increase in the number of truck occupants killed in crashes on Australian roads. I can report that has returned back to levels more consistent with prior years. So it looks as though 2019 will have just been a tragic anomaly. I'm really cautious around my language here. I cannot be comfortable with calling that normal, and we should never accept it as such. Before I dive into the detailed presentation, I will say again what both Kelly and Tony mentioned. Please jump in that Q&A box. The greatest value from these sessions comes from the dialogue. So please don't hesitate to jump in there. If there's anything that you are interested in or want to know more about as we go, that's all of our lunch and learn sessions have shown that's where the gold really comes from. So I mentioned that 2020 was not a normal year. I just want to dive into this. I threw this slide in at the last moment, so I apologize. It's not as pretty as the rest of the presentation. But this is looking at traffic volumes at one randomly chosen point on the Hume and comparing 2019 to 2020 traffic and light and heavy vehicles separately. And what we see is that overall over the course of the year, we had about a 20% reduction in light vehicle traffic volumes. And at the peak of lockdowns and restrictions in April of 2020, it was down by about 70% over normal traffic volumes and never really fully recovered back to 2019 or prior years for trucks. So for cars, but trucks very rapidly, because we have to keep the economy moving. We have to keep food on the shelves. If you look, they're very quickly back up to levels consistent or slightly above previous years. And what it says is that the improvement in our large loss crash frequency comes from that reduction in car volume, even where not all, a reasonably small percentage of our crashes, in fact, involve multiple vehicles. So diving into the specific topics, there's two areas I really want to focus on and work with the industry and government and regulators and everyone on in 2021. The first are inappropriate speed crashes. The most important thing that I need to do here is say that this is not about exceeding the speed limit. In the overwhelming majority of these crashes, the truck is well within the posted speed limit. This is about where the speed of that vehicle is above what can be safely driven on that piece of road, and the overwhelming majority are what are called untripped rollovers. Truck goes around a bend and falls on its side. Often that where the truck will come to a stop is actually still entirely on the road. So it's not that the truck has left the road and then rolled over as it went down an embankment or similar. Some of these happen at very low speeds. Probably the most noteworthy example there are concrete agitators, which, as many of you may know, the natural predator of the concrete agitator is the roundabout. And some of those crashes are happening at under 15 kilometers an hour. In fact, it's possible to roll a concrete agitator on flat ground. So over time, this has been declining. That tells a positive story, but that decline has plateaued and is now sitting at 14% of all of our large losses. And I want to keep driving that down, particularly because the vast majority of these crashes involve a rollover, and any time where the truck leaves its wheels, the risk to the occupants is an order of magnitude higher than other crash types. So it's really important we drive those incidents down. Other crash types might have greater incident cost, but this has got significantly escalated risk of loss of life. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about an incompatibility between the dynamics of the vehicle, its load, and that load part is significant, the geometry of the road, and the speed that the driver chose to drive around that corner. Those are the four things we can influence here. Now, obviously, we want drivers to stay within those limits. Oh, that's his fault for exceeding the limits, or his or her, I should say. The problem with that is, how do you determine where the limit is if the only way you could find it is by rolling a combination over or coming tantalizingly close to it? That historically, what we've really done is we've passed this down as almost communal knowledge, that you hop in the truck and you sit in the passenger seat while someone else drives and you see where he drives at what speeds on what corners, and then you swap seats and you're driving and they give you a clip around the ear if they think you're going into a corner too fast. And then you're largely sent out on your own. And you have to make a judgment as a truck driver, how fast am I going to go into this particular corner on this day, all whilst trying to get the job done. And yeah, there's no indirect thing we could historically, and I'll come back to this, that we could give drivers to inform them of how much of a buffer they had. And this is really challenging. In the end, we tended, the simplistic option here is to blame the drivers, but I simply don't believe that is fair. The other thing I'll mention around this is most of these rollover crashes happen on corners where the drivers are driving regularly. So this is not a question of unfamiliarity. If anything, it's that familiarity tends to breed contempt. We get comfortable, we start to risk discount. And so we need to keep reinforcing that message that the most important thing is to get to the destination every time, not to get there very quickly some of the time. So where are these crashes occurring? Now, most of them, a bit over a third, are happening on national and state highways. But I've got a caution on that because that's where most of our freight moves. That most of, particularly in articulated combinations, national and state highways is the overwhelming majority of ton kilometres of freight being moved on the road. So if we use all of our large losses as a bit of a way to normalise to say where the increased risk of single vehicle untripped rollovers, inappropriate speed crashes, we see that it's the secondary roads, B roads. It'll be some regional, it'll be like Beaudesert Boona Road. It'll be between two country towns where the road design is less forgiving, probably the geography is less forgiving. There's a whole lot of roads around the Gippsland where the risk of rollover is significantly higher. And that's reflected also if we look at the speed zones where they occur, that yes, most of them happen in 100-kilometre-hour zones, but as a proportion of our losses, 80 and 90-kilometre-hour zones are actually the higher risk. And so that is a message to take back to your drivers to say, hey, on this route, where do you think you're going to roll over? Put it as an open question and have them say, well, there's this there's a corner here where the camber changes. Well, have you spoken to our other drivers about that? That's the sort of discussion we can use this data to inform. So what do I think we need to do about it? The first thing is we need to challenge a few myths. There's what I like to call the super trucker myth, that rollover crashes won't happen to me because I'm too good of a driver. That's simply not reflected in our data. The drivers that are having these crashes have got more than a decade of experience in that license category. They tend to be quite familiar with the roads involved. And the reality of it is that most of these rollover crashes start at the rear of a combination and travel forwards, particularly in multi-combination vehicles. And Alan Pincott, who's here as an attendee today, does a wonderful accident reconstruction where he demonstrates that, and he uses some dash camera footage, and you can, as he talks you through the crash, you can see that where the rear trailer on a B-double had rolled over, and there's nothing at all visible in the dash camera footage until it is absolutely unrecoverable. So we need to have that hard conversation with our drivers to say, actually, no, you're not going to feel it through the seat of your pants. That by the time you do, it's already all over Red Rover, that you need to be using something else to protect you than just that mistaken belief. Heck, I was a truck designer, designed a truck from a blank sheet of paper, and it's out there there are multiple of them out there on the road. That sensation through the seat of your pants is actually something we can adjust and tune. We can change the suspension of the cab of the truck to change the feeling from the driver's seat about how close to the limit you are. And the only reason it's not set so that the drivers panic really early is that they complain that it rides like jelly. But that sensation does not reflect the stability of the trailer behind you, and particularly not if there's a trailer behind that and a trailer behind that. The next thing we can do is we can give drivers the best vehicles and the best loading possible. And there's been some really fantastic work done in this space. Work by Daryl Hutton in the forestry space, work by Borrell and Mack and Sesko around concrete agitators. There are people doing really cool things to look at our trucks and to say, can we give a better truck to our drivers? And also, and I'll flip to the other side, the load side, working with our consignors, our loading managers, our packers to say, how do we empower you to give him the safest load, or him or her the safest load to get them home every single day? And those are the sort of discussions that we need to reinforce in this space. Now, the next one, and it's what I want to talk about more in some detail, is around using electronic stability control data to influence this space. But before we dive into that, I'm actually going to fire up a quick poll. So let me launch this hopefully here. So you should see a poll appear on your screen, particularly for the second question. Please, even if you don't feel qualified to answer these, the first one is really to guide how much detail I go into on the next couple of slides. The second question, it's actually specifically because I know the people in this room probably don't have a clear view of the answer that I want to ask it. I'm going to use that for some work back to government to influence what's happening in this space. So it's really important to. So dive in, have an answer of those. I already sort of touched on empowering the chain. I will call out another really fantastic piece of work in that space that we had a presentation on in our February webinar, which is some work that Toll did around the loading of shipping containers, because that's a load that is almost always concealed from the driver. And so it's no good saying, oh, it's the driver's job to make sure that he knows, or he or she knows about the stability of their load, because it's almost completely concealed from them. And that's really fantastic work. Some of the diagrams they had made are brilliant. So I encourage you, jump on our Better Business Hub and find the highlights video from that webinar and find the really great guide to container loading, even if you don't carry any containers, because it shows that as an operator, you can be part of doing really great stuff to influence this. I'll make sure that I'll include that
yeah, we'll send that out when we send out the highlights reel.
Oh, fantastic. All right, I've got my answers here now, and I'll close out the poll there. So very quickly, about equal, call it half the room has some limited understanding of stability control, and a third of the room have no understanding about stability control. Wonderful. That's what I expected in this room. Question 2 has a correct answer, which is that stability control is mandatory on some new trailers, and it happened a year ago, but it's not yet mandatory on trucks. And the problem with it is it hasn't been effectively communicated, and I'll talk on that a little bit more. So what is electronic stability control? ESC, sometimes called trailer stability control. There's a few other roll stability control, RSC. So you'll hear a bunch of buzzwords and names in this space. It's not that complicated in the heavy vehicle space. It uses a sensor up underneath either the truck or the trailer or both. And when it feels that you're going a little bit too fast into the corner, enough that as a driver, you'd probably feel your stomach tense up and your eyes open up, it will lightly apply the brakes. It's only about a 5%. It's just a little light braking effort. And then it monitors, and that's a level 1 intervention. That tells you that the truck or the trailer or both thought that you were going a little bit too quick. And you probably did too in the driver's seat. If it then detects the speed of some of the tires, generally on the inside of the vehicle, so if you turn into the right-hand side of the vehicle, suddenly slowing or stopping, that tells the computer that those tires have left the ground and you are tantalizingly close to rolling that truck or combination. At that point, that's a level 2 intervention. It will madly apply the brakes, particularly on the laden side of the vehicle, because they've still got grip and they're still on the ground, to settle everything down. It'll generally flash a light on the dashboard. You'll know that something happened because you'll feel the truck braking, but that's really about it. There's been a number of initiatives that have seen this stability control forced on the industry, and it's now happening through the Australian design rule process. Now, I'm a truck brake engineer by qualification, so I should like this tech. The problem is that the value doesn't come from the greatest value doesn't come from that little intervention where it saved you then and there. The real value comes from being able to pull the data down every time that truck runs through the workshop and saying, here's the spectrum of my drivers. Bill, you're fantastic. You're having very few stability controllers. You've got a lot of buffer, credit to you. Here, have a, Coles Myer gift voucher. Actually, I'm showing my age with Coles Myer, aren't I? Have a gift voucher. You're fantastic. Oh, Steve, this is where you sit compared to average. You're having twice as many level 1 events and 3 times or 4 times as many level 2 events as the average of the rest of our drivers. Why do you think that is? And you'll see the way it's a discussion there. And again, I'll point to a previous webinar we had with a wonderful bloke out of the Victorian forestry industry, Daryl Hutton, around how to have those discussions. If you come down all punitive, you're really breaking that relationship. And my greatest fear in talking about this as a solution to rollover crashes is that it's delivered in a clumsy way by our frontline managers. It should be a discussion. It should be about supporting the excellence of our drivers as risk managers rather than berating people, generally with data they've never had access to before. For the first time, we can give them feedback to say, you are at a significantly higher risk of not making it home to your family at the end of this week. What can we do to change how you're driving to reduce that? And that's the discussion I'd love to see.
Adam, I was going to make exactly that point. The focus on driver behaviour is really critical, but we also need to be looking at what are the root causes that are driving those behaviours. What is going on in the organisation? What is the communication with dispatch? What is the communication with customers? What is the culture of the organisation that may have led to some of that decision making? So really glad you raised that. I've got a really good question here from the audience, which I think is so topical at the moment with the driver shortage. Just saying, how is that going to affect the ability of leaders to have those discussions with their drivers about changing those myths?
I think this is a perfect question, absolutely on point. We've got fleets where their drivers love the owners and managers would crawl across broken glass for them, who still have 5% or 10% of their trucks parked up at the moment. We have a significant issue around availability of drivers in Australian trucking. And I'd love your input here as well, Kelly, so don't go away on mute too quickly. My view is that if you can have this discussion the right way, ideally because you've already got that sort of relationship and that sort of dialogue inside of your business, you are probably the business that is going to have the least issue with driver turnover and attracting more drivers. If having this discussion causes your drivers to consider employment elsewhere, to arc up, then what that's telling you is there's an opportunity to improve how you're having the discussion. That if your drivers are feeling insulted or belittled or challenged, and it's a tough discussion to have, you need to be able to say that, hey guys, you are the most important factor in whether our truck makes it home at the end of the shift. But be aware of this, that NTI, we just got their data and they say that our greatest risk is single vehicle rollover crashes. How do we think we could protect ourselves from that? The more of a respectful, open discussion you can make it, the better it should be. If it's an edict from on high, if it takes the form of a one-page wall of text via email or stuck on a lunchroom notice board, you're missing the opportunity there.
And the other point, Adam, is about having that proactive conversation rather than, as so many of us often do, waiting till after the problem's been observed or there's been an incident and then having it. So I love that point. Be proactive.
Just on that, Adam, also. Tony?
Yeah, yep, yes, Tony.
Yeah, look, I mean, we have that in our own business and the willingness to have those conversations. And you, a lot of times it comes back to leadership and what capabilities you give your leaders to be able to have those conversations and the confidence to have those conversations in the right way. So again, on the Better Business Hub, there's a lot of work that Kelly's done and others have done in there to help leaders have those conversations with their people. And that doesn't change. And we've had a particular branch many years ago, the lowest engagement of any of our officers, worst results. And what it came down to is leaders not being prepared to have those hard conversations. And therefore, the good people you have are thinking, what's going on in this place? Yeah. They're letting these people get away with it. So, there's really positive ways of going about that we can all learn.
One final point I'll make on that is you can, if you want some guidance on how to have that conversation or to provide feedback and say, hey, look, we just had it and it's gone terribly. What do we do now? Reach out to Kelly. You can, if you don't already have her contact details, either get them from the wrap-up email we'll send after this, or you can go to the Better Business Hub and click on her there and send her a message. That's actually why that resource exists. No, but really fantastic question, absolutely on point. So the next topic I want to talk about here are inadequate following distance crashes. This makes about 9% of all of our large losses, or made up 9% of our large losses in 2020. And why I chose this to focus on is they all look the same, is ultimately it. That truck is driving along in traffic for some reason, and it really doesn't matter to me what that reason is. For some reason, that traffic suddenly slows. The truck is unable to slow fast enough and runs into the vehicle, most commonly a car in front of it, and often pushes that car into another car and into another car and into another car, and makes for a very, very bad day for all involved and a very stressful time for our claims team trying to work out who third party number 7 is in that event. And as with my message around inappropriate speed crashes not being around speed, and I want to make this point, I'm going to stop my shoulder. I need to make this one really clear. We cannot solve the problem of following distance for trucks by focusing solely on trucks. So whereas those single vehicle crashes are an issue for us as an industry to own ourselves, well, and in partnership with our supply chains, I will call out that, to respond to this, it's going to need a holistic response. It's a whole of traffic problem and it needs a whole of traffic solution. I briefed to government and regulators and others on this prior to launch. And the point I made to them there is if there's anyone in this room who thinks they can influence this number solely by punishing truck drivers, then before they say or do anything, reach out to me and I'll get them a ride for 4 hours in the passenger seat of a truck, and it will 100% change their opinion on that. The issue
So does
here,
that mean, Adam, we need an education campaign for drivers of cars? Should they be watching this presentation, or should we be finding a way to share it with them?
really, really fantastic question there, Kelly. There is some really great education in this space. I'll call out 2 campaigns here. One at the moment, which is a joint initiative. I think it's Toll and Coles. I think the We Need Space to Keep You Safe campaign, supported by an NHVR Heavy Vehicle Safety Initiative grant. Really great campaign. It was great chatting with their team at the Brisbane Truck Show. The one that I think is most on point, though, for this inadequate following distance issue is another campaign run by the Queensland government under their Street Smarts banner. We'll include that in the post-webinar email as well. What it has is the view from the cab of a truck with a superimposed football field out the front, and it's just driving down a public road and there's cars continuously cutting into it. And that's the point here. However, we've been running education, awareness, those positive uplift campaigns in this space for quite some time. What I believe is missing, and what all of the behavioral psychology and compliance psychology research says, is that you actually do need to have the stick as well. That when government wants to influence the trucking industry, they're at times disturbingly eager to go down a punitive route. If there's no prospect of being enforced against as a car driver for how you drive around trucks, then eventually all of those awareness campaigns just become noise. And until Queensland Police, as an example, my home state, have police on segways, but they don't have police in trucks. And I don't understand that. Not the least because I don't really understand segways, but ignoring that.
Nobody does.
Wrapping up that segue there and going back to my presentation, but it is important to think about how would we influence this? And the answer is to change light vehicle driver behaviour. In that space, I want to talk about, so we have an issue around inadequate following distance. I want to talk about what is adequate following distance. Presume most of the participants here have a car license and have driven a car. If you're driving along in your reasonably modern, reasonably well-maintained car on dry bitumen, and you pull your right foot up next to your shoulder and you fire it at the brake pedal and smash it hard on the floor, it will take you about 57 meters, or 50 meters rather, sorry, to come to a stop, limited by the friction between your tires and the road. Truck brakes are different. As a start, because you just mash the brake pedal, the truck driver doesn't get any forewarning that you're about to stop. He or she then has a typical human reaction time is north of a second if you don't know that something's about to take place. Truck brakes don't have a direct connection from the pedal to the actual physical braking components. They use an air signal to request braking, and then there's valves down near the brakes, then you use high pressure air to apply them. And that comes with a fundamental mechanical delay. So you mash the brake pedal and come to a stop in 50 meters. The truck driver sees that happening and immediately, brakes as fast as they can. 42 meters in reaction time. It takes 6 meters before the brakes on the prime mover, if we are using a double here, it would be often called a 2-trailer road train, before the brakes on the prime mover are even doing anything at all. So then 6 meters for the first trailer, 11 meters before the brakes on the converter dolly, and another 10 meters for brakes on the second trailer are starting to contribute towards slowing that whole combination down. And then even once it's achieved full braking, it's basically that far again before the combination will come to a stop, for a total of 157 meters. And that's for a truck and 2 trailers that are entirely compliant and legal to be on the road. Got to ask yourself, and I put this question to the room, how often as you're driving up and down a highway do you see 107 meters of clear space between 2 vehicles, or between a car and the truck behind it? Extremely rarely. And so as a result, because we all follow too close, this is the outcome. We have 9% of my large losses every year look exactly the same as each other. So what can we do? As I say, car driver behavior, and that needs regulatory intervention. Education's great, and I really, really like the campaign that TMR, Queensland Transport, have in that Street Smarts space. But it's a drop in the ocean compared to the effort required, and it's in one state only. We need to own that as well. I've got a poll question coming up here where I want to prod it. One of the things we need to acknowledge is that every car driver, when we say this, that they are part of this problem, they will say, but I've been tailgated by a truck. And we just need to own that with 600,000 heavy vehicles in Australia, over the course of people's driving career, they will have crossed paths with a driver who had either bad driving behaviours or was having a bad day, or a combination of the two, and had a truck closer to the back of their car than they were comfortable with. And we need to acknowledge that. That means that when we're trying to drive change in this space, we have to acknowledge we're coming from a position of perceived deficit. And that's just something we need to own. And then we can back it up with technology. And I'll talk a little bit more about that technology shortly.
Adam, we've got a relevant comment from the audience just before we show this clip about the effort in Europe at the moment around separating commercial vehicles, cars, bikes, pedestrians, giving different spaces on the road. Mark's comment was, we need to reconsider our approach to trucks and their interaction outside the left-hand lane. Do you mean any comment on that approach?
I mean, if the COVID numbers showed us anything, it's that anything we can do to reduce light vehicle interaction with trucks has a good road safety outcome. And that drives a few potential responses. I'll say this, I think that what COVID showed us is that working from home, and therefore good internet access, something like fibre to the premises, is actually a road safety initiative. That if we can reduce the peak hour traffic and reduce those traffic volumes, that is a very good thing. There's also some other initiatives here. I've got to give credit to the Queensland Trucking Association, who put forward a proposal which has then been adopted by both the Queensland government and the federal government to essentially duplicate the Bruce Highway inland of the Great Dividing Range and create a north-south freight route so that we can separate the tourist and domestic travel on the Bruce Highway from what portion of the freight task can effectively move further inland. So it's a really good point to look at how we create that separation, and also making sure that trucks are as suitable for the task as they can be. Like, I've been seeing a lot of ex-mining, very heavy spec side tippers doing CBD construction waste removal with trucks that have poor forwards visibility and very limited technology. And I think looking at what we as an industry can do to support that as well, that it's a complicated space, but certainly anything that separates trucks from other road users is going to have positive safety outcomes. Without saying that any one side or the other of that is particularly at fault for that. There's just questions of compatibility. So in talking on car driver behaviour, I just want to share a clip, and I've got to give big thanks to Jeff Crouch from Ron Crouch Transport for giving me permission to share this. This was an interaction that happened in the Riverina in the last week. So let me see if I can get this to play. I'll just stop it there before the truck drivers start using some particularly colourful language to describe how they felt about that event. Issues like that are happening continuously out there to our truck drivers, and there's surprisingly little regulatory response to them. One thing I want to try to spin up is to build a good library of dash camera footage of cars eroding the stopping distance in front of trucks that are just driving down the highway, minding their own business, so that when I sit down with government and regulators, police, I can play 100 clips at them and say, this is happening continuously over and over again. So to the operators in the room, it's highly likely that I'll talk to you about that in the not too distant future. I want to talk about what we can do with some technology in this space. There's two technologies that are relevant to this following distance crash type. One is advanced emergency braking, also known as autonomous emergency braking, also known as active emergency braking. I'll let you pick whichever A you would like in that space. I just call it Adam emergency braking. And this is technology that uses a combination of either radar and camera sensors, which are the better systems, or radar only systems to look ahead and detect the risk of an imminent collision. It will then flash lights and beep at the driver. If the driver doesn't brake, it will get more insistent. And then if the driver continues to fail to respond, it will automatically apply the brakes and do a full-blown emergency stop, the kind that'll throw you against your seatbelt to reduce the severity of the potential crash. Doesn't mean that no crash will occur, but that the speeds will be lower. As a general rule, this is only available as an OEM option, so it requires turnover of fleet. It's not yet mandatory in Australia, so you have to tick an options box if you want it, or buy the right truck, or both. Really great systems, but with the average age of prime movers in Australia sitting around something like 12 years, it's going to take a while for that to make a significant difference. Really great stuff. And if you're interested, reach out and we'll go out and try and get a video of a demonstration. The other technology that's relevant here is forward collision warning systems, FCWS. Using not hugely different sensors, but can only alert. So it can go and beep at you and flash at you, but it doesn't interact directly with the truck's braking system. The dominant player in this space is Mobileye, owned by Intel, and it also does a few other features as well. It'll do speed zone compliance, blind spot monitoring, depending on which boxes you tick in that space. What makes it interesting is it is available as an aftermarket retrofit, and so it can be rolled out to existing fleets. That's a bit of a balance. Obviously, AEB, that ability to independently intervene is quite valuable, but having to wait 12 years before it's in half the trucks means that we've got some challenges in that space. If you've got any questions on either of these techs, I'm a former brake test engineer. You can jump on our Better Business Hub and find me and reach out. And I love those discussions. In fact, the problem you'll have is getting me to shut up. One of the other things that got suggested to me when I talked about this topic was, oh, don't we just need to put better brakes in trucks? And I said, better brakes, let me talk about that. So the first thing I mentioned was that truck brakes don't apply immediately, that they rely on an air signal literally flowing down a little plastic hose to run from the front of the truck to the last trailer, which in worst case in Australia is 60 meters away. If we take that same example, an A-double, and we put electronic braking systems in, which augments that pneumatic signal with an electronic one, we can take 17 meters out of that 157 meter stopping distance. So we stopped in 140. But that still means we need to have 90 meters of following distance. And I put the question to the room again, do we regularly have 90 meters of following distance on Australian roads? No, we don't. We all follow too close. If we go back to a dumb pneumatic brake system, but we put on higher performing brakes that can use up all of the friction available from the tires, we can shorten that stopping distance by 23 meters, at which point we're 6 meters better. We're now at 84 meters of following distance. We don't have 84 meters of following distance. Bring the two of those together, EBS and air disc brakes or high performing braking systems, and it's wonderful. We can pull 40 meters out of that stopping distance. I went and sat yesterday morning at an overpass over the Pacific Motorway, and I watched the following distance between trucks and cars. Look, even with those higher performing brakes and smart braking control systems, it's not going to make the difference we need to see. We need to change driver behavior. It will be a positive that the impact energy with those systems for the same reaction time and the same vehicle otherwise will be significantly lower. So I'm a big advocate for that technology. But if we really want to drive these numbers down, we need to change how all drivers on Australian roads behave.
Now, Adam, take a breath. You right?
Yep.
Okay, just take a moment. You've been talking a lot about smart brakes, but what does this mean practically for all these people attending today? What can they do when they get back into their businesses?
The biggest thing is have a discussion. I've got a couple of friends that are really good in the heavy vehicle braking space, and they tell me numerous stories of being paid to come out to fit smart brakes to existing trailers, getting there and discovering that they're already fitted and just nobody knew. So the first thing I'd say is, regardless of where you sit in the business, ask the person who should know, do we have any of this tech? And if yes, well, what's it doing? How's it working? If no, well, why not? And should we be considering it? Just the biggest thing you could do off the back of this presentation around smart braking is to have a discussion inside of your business. The other point I'll make here is that it got mandated by the New South Wales EPA several years ago, but it was only that it had to be fitted. And the real value isn't having it present. The real value is that data feedback loop that I mentioned earlier that comes, it's actually the EBS enables the existence of the stability control. So the two almost inevitably come together. And the other nice part about using that data and providing the feedback loop back to your drivers is it means you notice a lot quicker if it stops working. The other thing you'll need there is your people in your workshop will need to be able to do the day-to-day support themselves, but they need to have the right phone number written up on the whiteboard down the end of the workshop or in the lunchroom of the person they call when they can't work it out. They need to have a good advanced support person and know who it is and be empowered to call them. Bring all those pieces together, and this stuff is really great. The other thing it can do, and I'll say this really for the operators in the room, is it can also tell you about how your drivers are using your brakes. Those that are looking a long way ahead and are doing everything on the Jake versus those that are trying to drive it like a race car. And the difference between those two extremes is probably a 20-fold increase in brake maintenance costs. These systems have the data in them. It's probably, if you've got trailers you bought in the last year, they've already got it fitted, and it can tell you who your best drivers are around being gentle on the gear. You just need to download it and know what it's telling you. So there's some real, and that's dollars. That's reduced cost in linings and drums and workshop time. So if you're not using it, you're a less efficient business than you otherwise could be.
Adam, I loved hearing stories from a couple of operators we've spoken to recently that have said that doesn't also make their, their business slower. It doesn't impact on productivity in terms of, the number of runs or the speed of the runs or whatever it might be, because actually those good drivers are anticipating problems and able to be equally, if not more efficient.
I did some work with Boral, in the past, like 15 years ago, that basically demonstrated to them that no amount of haste could make up for the lost time of a single mistake. That they could rush as madly around. At the moment they tried to increase production speed, errors and breakdowns and rework cost them 3 times more anything they gained by trying to be the fastest. And that lesson, I think, applies perfectly across into trucking. So yeah, closing out a few points I touched on at the start. The data on our fatal crashes, fatal car and truck crashes remain the same. 80% of the time, the truck is the not at fault party. That flips when we look at non-fatal crashes. So it's 65%, nearly 2/3 of the time, the truck is the at fault party. And it's worth picking that apart and understanding what's going on here. When we have truck at fault crashes, they are almost overwhelmingly nose to tail and other maneuvering type crashes. Where we have car at fault crashes, particularly the fatal ones, they tend to be either head-on crashes or pulling out of side roads, so T-bone type crashes, and the survivability of those crash types is significantly lower. One of the challenges we have, for example, South Australia has a lot of regional highways that have level crossing, or you have to cross the southbound traffic to get into the northbound lanes, etc. And we have issues around either look but didn't see crashes, particularly older car drivers who will drive up, stop, look down the road and pull straight out in front of a road train, or more for younger persons where they don't even stop. They go belting through it 50 kilometres an hour, 60 kilometres an hour, assuming that nothing will be there. And unfortunately, that is not the case. The other thing I have to mention here, in 2020, because of the reduced number of car and truck crashes generally and the reduced traffic volumes, we saw a reduction in accidental car and truck deaths. We didn't see a corresponding reduction in intentional car and truck deaths. The proportion, as a result of that, the balance between intentional and accidental car and truck fatal crashes got worse. It was 37.5% and then 37.9% in our previous reports of crashes that were car and truck fatal crashes that were indicated or strongly indicated to be suicide. In 2020, that was 43%. So over 2 in every 5. And as I say, that's not an indication that those events went up, but rather that accidental road deaths went down. but an exceptionally challenging space, and one that I'm, Naomi Frauenfelder, the new CEO of Health and Trucks and Sheds, has exceptional experience and qualifications on dealing with issues like this in the rail space. So I'm really happy to have her coming into trucking. Final one I mentioned at the start was around fatigue crashes. Back in the early 2000s, this was over 1 in 4 of all of our large losses. So to see it down at 8% is an absolute credit. But if I look at the last 3 years of last 3 reports, fatigue is 38% of our insured truck driver deaths. So it's still an issue. We have to keep driving it down. In terms of your people making it home alive from every shift, this is the greatest risk to loss of life in trucking. In 2020, I'll be frank, we had so few NTI insured drivers lose their lives that I don't like using just 2020's data. Talk about 60% of our insured driver deaths were fatigue in 2020, but it makes me really happy to have so few incidents that the data is not reliable in that the sample is too small. I hope we continue to have that problem in future. I look forward to a day where I have no data whatsoever, because these are people who didn't make it home to their families. So yeah, positive that fatigue is down, and a credit to the work the industry has done around making sure drivers have the things we need here. Drivers have to have sufficient quality and quantity of sleep, and they need to feel empowered to stop driving or not drive at all where they recognise they're unable to, and then back it up with technology. When I look at fatigue by state, South Australia was the worst in the previous report. It's now Queensland has the highest risk of a rate of fatigue crashes once you correct for the volume of freight. As I touched on earlier, the Bruce Highway is a real issue there. It's got a lot of mixed road use, and the geography and geology means it's not a great place to have a highway. So I'm really excited for that inland freight route, and I hope that Queensland, who has typically been overrepresented in this space, will see improvement as that project is delivered. The final point I want to cover, and then we will take any questions in the time we have remaining, is, as I mentioned, 2019 was a very bad year for truck occupant deaths. 2020, it returned back to a level more akin to prior years. If I correct for the freight task, what concerns me is we aren't seeing any long-term downwards trend in truck driver deaths per volume of freight delivered. That's something we need to work on. We need to have an industry-wide plan around how do we deal with the issues specifically that see us being consistently one of the most dangerous occupations in Australia. I'm really proud of the trucking industry, but we can't really consider ourselves great until we're getting all of our people home safe. Yeah, it's for me is the biggest mission we need as an industry to have. All right, I know I'm short on time there, so I'll jump to remaining.
And look, we've got 2 really, really good questions, Adam. So the first is, will the new EWP being launched by the NHBR help, do you think, with fatigue management?
So yeah, really great question there. That's Electronic Work Diary, EWD.
I was wondering what EWP was. I knew Electronic Work Diaries.
Short answer is no. That it doesn't change the fact that work hour tracking is only a rough proxy for your ability to safely drive a vehicle. What it does is it reduces the administrative burden of managing that rough proxy. And that's a good thing, because if you're going to have a relatively inefficient regulation, or relatively ineffective regulation, it might as well be as efficient as it can be. I'm a big fan of going to them just because, yeah, there's a huge amount of wasted time and effort in transport that I'd far rather be redirected to, rather than collecting yellow sheets of paper, redirected to the sort of discussions that we flagged earlier. That's going to have a lot more value. So freeing up your people from shuffling paper and instead let them focus on managing risk.
That relates really to the next question, which is more around, with the current science around how difficult it is to diagnose your own fatigue state. How are drivers able to self-diagnose, particularly around those micro sleeps?
Yeah, really, really great question. First thing I'll say is absolutely correct. Feedback we get consistently from operators with driver monitoring systems is that they'll have a microsleep event detected, the machine will intervene and wake them up, and the driver will be adamant that it was a false positive. Then they'll sit them down and play the footage, and the driver's jaw drops because, well, in the video, there's the driver with their head down on their chin. I'll stop my share there. So their head down on their chin and sound asleep whilst driving a truck at 100 kilometers an hour. So the thing there is, as I said, have access to sufficient quality and quantity of sleep, be empowered to stop when you don't think you should be driving or not start driving when you shouldn't be driving, and back it up with technology that the average experience in their license category for my drivers having serious fatigue crashes is 14 years. But just because I've been driving long distance for a long time doesn't tell you that you can recognize when you're about to have a micro sleep. And it also means to be somewhat considerate when you're having the discussion with the drivers after they've had one. Because I've had drivers say, oh, I heard a loud bang and the truck was off the road, the steering must have broken. And then you go back and you piece it together. That one in particular only had outwards facing dash camera footage. He'd fallen asleep. The truck very gently veered off the road. The bang he heard was as the front axle mashed into the bump stops as the truck landed 8 feet down off the embankment. But the human brain then tries to piece back together what it thinks must have happened. And it's not, that driver actually was fired because he was lying to his boss about why he crashed. I don't think he was. I think he truly believed that something had broken because that's the story his brain could piece back together with the evidence it had taken in.
At one point, just to make that, Adam, this is not just a long haul or rural issue. This is a real issue in all forms of transport and logistics. And we're doing a trial at the moment supporting technology implementation with urban buses. And I have seen that footage, and it is frightening. How real that fatigue risk is for all types of freight task.
The other thing I'll say in this space is we also unquestionably have a massive issue with undiagnosed sleep apnea in the transport industry. That if you look at, and we've done some really great work with a sleep doctor from South Australia, Dr. Robert Adams, on our Better Business Hub. And if you look at the risk factors for sleep apnea, and then you look at the demographics of Australian truck drivers, it is a perfect overlap. The estimates as high as the high 40% range of drivers may have undiagnosed sleep apnea. The best thing you can do for a person with sleep apnea is get them treated. The quality of life improvement is incredible, but there is this classic reluctance. I'd rather not know. And we need, as an industry, we need to challenge that.
Look, I think, Adam, that's a fantastic topic, perhaps for another day, because I think that would be a whole webinar on its own, but I'm just very conscious of time and we are out of it. Tony, just opportunity for you. Are there any comments that you want to make before we wrap today's session up?
I just think the similarities, I know it's more volatile business when you've got people out there on the road, but the similarities in how we manage this and manage the information is very similar to our business. And again, I get back to that leadership thing. When we have had issues and failings in our business, it goes back to investing in the leadership of our people and giving them the capabilities to actually deal with people in those situations and have great conversations, not negative ones, just great conversations with people to help them improve in what they're doing and allow them to get home, in this instance, get home safe. And I think the programs that you've brought to the table at NTI, Kelly, have been incredibly important in that interaction, and also your involvement in developing the Better Business Hub. I know it's a bit of an ad, but it is an ad because we're committed to it in our own business, not because we're insisting on it in other people's business. That's your choice. But we believe it works for us, and we think things like that will work for you as well. So thank you very much, both Kelly and Adam. It's been really informative to me, as usual, being the token insurance person here.
Fantastic. Kate, well, thanks so much, Tony, for being here with us today. Much appreciated. And Adam, as always, brilliant presentation. I know you've actually delivered that around different organisations a couple of times now. And I believe you'll also be at a number of state-based associations delivering that in the next few months. So if you had, if there are others in your network that you think need to hear this message, you can either share the recording with them or reach out to Adam or any of the rest of our team that you can find on the website, or look out for Adam at a conference near you soon. Guys, we are going to send a short survey. Very conscious of time. We've been a little bit over today. Thank you so much again for your attendance. We will send the highlights reel and all of those links that Adam referenced in the presentation. And once the webinar completes, you will actually receive a short survey. Really appreciate your feedback in that survey because it does help us with topics to present going forward, and always love your feedback as well. Thank you again. Much appreciated. Look forward to seeing you all next month.